belajar speaker Crystal Widjaja. Jadi ya mungkin kalau yang nggak tahu, Crystal dulu lulus dari Berkeley, Go Bears, jadi alma mater Go juga. So from Berkeley, and then spend a lot of time in Gojek. I think seeing Gojek dari kecil sampai obviously right before the IPO. So it's been in tech for a while, and I think before now she's in Kumu. Between that, I think if I'm not mistaken, helping out Reforge, Sequoia, and mostly just taking a bit of a break. And now the CPO of Kumu. So yeah, she'll be talking a bit about team metrics for success, performance. So I think it'll generally be a bit more fluid. I don't know, Crystal, if you have any materials, but yeah,
much more fluid. Yes. I hope everyone is okay with a more casual talk today. So if you guys have questions, random questions, thinly veiled problems that you are experiencing at work that you need advice on, feel free to anonymously ask. I won't call you out if you DM me on Zoom. Just say someone said. So this is a safe place, don't worry. I don't know any of the teams here or anyone important or any of the politics internally, so feel free to ask questions. I can share my screen. I have like some slides, but we don't have to go through all of it if it's not something you guys want to do. Let me see, how do I share the screen? I guess this is fine. Okay, so you're gonna like see my many WhatsApp messages that I have not answered yet. Let me see. Okay, I'm gonna try to show my screen. Sorry, Zoom always does this thing. Or like kills my.
Just FYI, we're seeing your Slack, but yeah.
Yes, there you go. Can you see the right screen? Hold on, let me try sharing my presenter desktop. This one. Okay. All right. Is this now the right screen?
Yep. Perfect.
Okay, perfect. All right. So for those of you who don't know me, as Brian said, I was at Gojek early days, built the data team and then the growth team. In between that, the fraud and risk team, internal portals, internal communications, ended up as chief of staff to Kevin and Andre, who were the co-CEOs at Gojek before I left, and then ended up doing a bunch of advising and angel investing during COVID because there was nothing else that we could do at that time. I'm now the interim CPO at Kumu, which is a live streaming startup in the Philippines. And I've been working with Reforge, which is kind of like an MBA for product managers and tech professionals, where I made a program called Data for Product Managers. So most of my content for today is going to be around that because it's very closely related to setting goals and metrics and how to use data to drive impact in a business. So if you have questions at any time, feel free to just drop it in the chat. Don't worry, it won't be too distracting and I can just answer through voicing it out, or you can raise your hand, whichever Brian thinks is best. You can listen to him. He'll let people know how to do this. Cool. So I'll get started. We can go through this and then we'll leave a bunch of time at the end for questions. So as I mentioned, Data for Product Managers, I think, is a framework that I put together based on my experience at Gojek. As the BI team back then, our job was to help the business understand what to care about, because there's always going to be a bunch of metrics. Not all of them will be equally important. So our biggest role was to help separate the noise and the signal and then create structured OKRs so that enough people were working on the right things that ended up with impact for the business. So I would kind of call this an altitude map because I also used to play a lot of League of Legends, and I thought about data being kind of like your fog of war when you are playing games. You don't have all of the information, but slowly over time, as you learn more about the map and the players, you kind of uncover this fog of war that helps you understand a little bit more about the ecosystem or the industry or the market or the consumers that you are working within. So the altitude map is basically what I call this scorecard. So your supervisor is basically your boss, and maybe that's the CPO, maybe that's the CEO, maybe it's the head of product, or maybe if you're in sales, it's your sales manager or anyone else. But there's basically something that your boss cares about that you need to be aware of. And then as a product manager or as a salesperson, I need to know what I should care about as it relates to what my boss cares about. And that's the unfortunate reality of working at a startup that's this big. Like, everyone cares about something and you are reporting to somebody who has some goals, and knowing what those goals are is extremely important. The last layer here is basically what I call the solution altitude. It's basically, what are the solutions that I am picking and that I'm going to work on that I believe makes an impact on my goals. I think this framework is something that I came up with because I realized that either my boss might not know what their goals are, and this was a helpful tool to help them realize that they needed to make that clear to me, or that as the boss of the team that I ran at Gojek, I would realize that I never was really clear with my team members about what I cared about, and not being able to visualize that meant that they couldn't really figure out why their feature ideas weren't something that I agreed with, because we couldn't list these all out clearly. So once you have your altitude map, your scorecard of metrics, the next thing is to make sure that those are the right metrics. And this is going to be an ongoing process. I would think that the data at Kita Visa is really good, because I think some ex-Gojek people are there. So let's hope that it's great. If it's not, please tell me who I should yell at. But it means that you need to have data that will help support or invalidate that metric, that you are tracking it consistently, and that when you build something or do something that should impact it, you should generally see that number move or be impacted on your altitude metric. Without that instrumentation, without that data, you can't actually figure out this cycle between, sorry, it's like thundering outside. It's very hard to figure out if you're on the right track. Sorry, can you guys hear the thunder? Hopefully not. It's a little distracting.
It's all good. I think we hear only a bit of it. So
okay, I promise nothing will. I think the internet infrastructure here is relatively okay. So when it comes to instrumentation, I have a whole blog post on this, so I won't get too into the details, but someone should own this. And if you have a metric that you care about, you should care about how it's being tracked and be aware of the data pipelines it's using and how effective it is. Because without this, you can't really run analysis. Analysis leads you to insights. So I often talk about how data isn't really that helpful without an insight. An insight should be beyond just information. It should inspire a change of action. So it needs to be correct data, and it also needs to be something that you can act on. So for example, us knowing that people only eat 3 times a day in GoFood is not really helpful information, though that is knowledge. It's more valuable to know that people who work in SCVD are 2 times more likely to eat all of their meals in the office for both lunch and dinner, because that tells us that their proximity or their propensity to order GoFood is higher in terms of probability than someone who lives elsewhere. So it's insights that help you target your resourcing, your time, and your influence on problems that are actually meaningful opportunities. I'll get into this a little bit more in a bit. To be able to do this analysis and generate these insights, you need to be able to run the right statistical methods. The 2 most important that I think are necessary for not just product managers, but anyone working in a startup should be the ability to segment between businesses, customers, or behaviors, and then to compare that analysis with other segments and compare behaviors within segments. I'll get into this a little bit more if it's confusing. But the ability to say, here's what these two differences are between these two types of users, and how important that difference is what leads you to focusing on the right problems. And then, of course, communicating, leveraging data. I won't get into these as much because we only have like 50 minutes. So let's jump into altitude metrics a little bit more. So what is the altitude map? Like I mentioned, it's what does your boss care about? What do I care about? And then what are the things that I would be working on? This says Uber because Reforge is for a very American market and they don't know what Gojek is. But this is basically the Gojek setup, wherein you would have a product manager who owns driver benefits as a work stream because their boss cares about overall driver supply quality. They care about acquisition, the number of supply hours in the platform, and benefits is just one way that your boss becomes successful. And there are other PMs that you work with on this kind of same plane of altitude, but your specific solutions are things like the tipping feature or driver benefits and rewards around what type of Chichalon packages they get access to, what kind of healthcare they get. And these are the solutions that are entrusted to you, but it's important to know why these exist and whether or not you should continue working on these. Because you end up sometimes with a local maxima rather than a global optimum, or however that's designed. And you keep like hammering away at the same solution, but it doesn't move anymore. The way that this works is trying to figure out what your boss cares about helps you determine if there's new angles to look at the problem without going too far away from what they care about. So it's kind of an anchor in the business realm that you work in. So I also look at this in terms of how you progress in your career. Knowing what your boss cares about and how to make them look good helps you look good and helps you grow in your career as well. The important part about this is figuring out, how do I know what my boss cares about if they don't know what they care about? One way to try to have that conversation, if it's not an easy one, is to look at three things. So I always look at acquisition, retention, and monetization. If it's not one of these three metrics, then you probably haven't found the right company metric yet, or your boss is not responsible for an important enough metric. So in terms of acquisition, it's always things like how many new users are in the door, how many people are adopting the product and getting value out of it. For retention, it's how many people keep coming back and keep getting that value, or at least are in touch with us to potentially have that value, whether that's setting up a new donation page or coming back to that donation page time and time again to see how that campaign is progressing, or how other users are finding new donation pages from that original page. And then of course, because this is a very hard market for everyone right now, monetization is very important. Understanding net revenue and how the business operates, whether that's understanding gross profit or margins or any number of metrics that help you understand how the business generates more value and ROI. That could be a specific metric goal that your boss has that you also need to be able to plug into, ideally. There are a couple of other metrics that are things like kind of more market driven. And this is if you're in the strategy team, knowing whether or not you have penetration in the total addressable market that you see in the industry, whether or not a certain type of user is being appropriately targeted or is being acquired so that the product can grow into a new business line. There might be other key metrics here that are more product market fit expansion driven, and those are also valuable metrics as well. Understanding that you have that data and your metrics, I won't actually talk too much about how do I know exactly what KPI to set, because every company really is different. but this is kind of what I would look for. It has to be one of these three metrics. And if it's not, then you probably haven't figured out the right business KPI yet. But every company is different. It might be based on product lines, it may be based on the funnel, or types of users that you're targeting. But one of these things have to be there, and there is no single size fits all metric. Once you do know what metric you're supposed to care about, and of course that your boss is supposed to care about, the two things I lean on to make sure that I'm doing product planning or business planning effectively is segmentation and variable comparison. So segmentation, when I set by the different types of users I have, what they are doing and why. So the who and the what are basically your segments. So who would be a free user, someone who created a donation page, someone who donated to a donation campaign. These are the who. And trying to figure out the what helps you figure out the variables, whether or not they received donations or not, whether or not they received 100 plus or less donations, whether or not they hit their goal or not. Those are different types of segments. And each one of those yes or no answers is actually a variable. So that variable would be whether or not they hit their successful campaign goal, whether or not they shared their donation page, and figuring out which one is more likely to lead to success. Which one of these is more important than the other? And knowing that prioritization is important because you can't solve for everything all at once. You do have to kind of make a call on which thing to work on or which problem really presents an opportunity. And I use things like odds ratio analysis and correlation analysis to compare these different variables with each other. So I'll basically look at users who shared their donation page, campaign page, versus the users who received 100 donations. Which one of those two types of people are more likely to create a second campaign? Which one is the more valuable experience or behavior to try to index on? And then that's the goal metric that we should use to optimize on in the next quarter. And in the meantime, we could be looking for more variables, but this is basically a cycle. So I figure out that this is the one behavior that needs to happen. It's the most important behavior out of all of the other ones that I've looked at. I'll go and make some product strategy decisions or create a new feature or make a business decision. And then I will see whether or not that improves my second campaign creation rate or retention rate. And if it doesn't look like it's causing an improvement in my metrics, maybe there is correlation, but not causation. Maybe I was wrong and I need to move to a second behavior, or I need to continue doing more analysis to find something that is more correlated statistically to my goal metric of retention or second campaign creation rate. Doing that is effectively like the entire cycle. This is actually all I have in terms of slides. So I'm like done very quickly. But I'm happy to walk through any of these in more detail for the templates for odds ratio. What do you think, Brian?
Yes, no, first of all, thanks. We are also, I think, FYI for everyone, reforged materials are typically very expensive. So we're getting a glimpse for free.
Yes, it's like $2,000 a year.
Yeah, so no, thank you for that. And I think, like you mentioned, I think I can just open it up for people because they might have questions related to what you've shared and maybe others related to team KPIs and managing teams. But maybe before that, I'll just quickly summarize what I've learned, at least in Indonesian, in case for some who might not be as clear. I think, mungkin yang gue paling suka banget, really how I think Crystal aligns that data-driven mindset on how we set KPIs and how we actually judge whether something is success or failure. So aside from the League of Legends analogy, which I appreciate, but I think ini mungkin poin penting juga ya, gimana cara ngeliat tim KPI or company KPI ujung-ujungnya aligning sama business performance. Because if it doesn't, then it's not as effective. So I think that part is really good. I'm not sure kalau ada yang punya pertanyaan, but maybe I have one just to start. Kan tadi I think what we've heard has been really helpful in terms of defining what a potential KPI would be to really judge whether something is good or bad. But just curious, in a startup, your team is typically not the most experienced, right? It's usually, younger people, maybe priorities shift a lot. So just wondering, on the qualitative side, right? How would you approach, team building, especially individuals, building up their appropriate skills? And I think konteksnya in Indonesia, right? I mean, you've worked in multiple places, worked with different types of people, but I know Indonesian has a different culture and a different way to approach things. So mungkin ini mulai pertanyaannya satu ya, tapi feel free yang lain kalau punya pertanyaan, please share ke Crystal, gua, Rika, atau di group chat. But yeah, how do you approach building, people's skills, and how would you align that with your KPIs you've set?
Yeah, I actually think given a lot more of the experience I had with working with other startups in other countries, especially in the US, I actually think we overinflate the skills that we think international people have compared to us. Because actually I have found that we're actually doing pretty well. Like when I try to explain segmentation or correlation analysis with people in the US, they are just as lost. So hey, we can get a head start, everyone. Do not feel like you aren't good enough or not able to compete, because I actually think that we are. I think for us, it's more about, let's pick a very narrow set of skills to get really good at and start there. We can all ramp up on many different things, but I think having a good foundation on segmentation is super important. The ability to know what are common segmentation types and how do I write a SQL query to get it, or how do I use Mixpanel or CleverTap or whatever analytics tool I have to do segmentation myself. I need to get to be an expert in that so that I can build my skills and leverage it elsewhere. When I started at Gojek, I only learned SQL to start out with, because without that skill, I couldn't do very much to make up for the fact that I had no skills. So I had to get good at something, one thing, and that ended up being SQL for me. And the thing that I would suggest is to just try. No one is going to tell you that you shouldn't be doing this work, as long as you're doing the work that you were expected to do still. But if you try something new and you're hey, I did this segment, not sure if it's right or if it's even any good, but I did it. What do you think? And I guarantee that no one's going to be I can't believe you did this bad segment and now I think less of you. If you're trying something new and you're trying to get good at it, you have to kind of suck at it first. You should see some of the old SQL queries that I wrote at Gojek early days. They were bad. They were dumb and bad and poorly optimized. So I kind of had to suck at that first before I could get good at writing SQL. And I was shameless. I would ask people on my team, am I doing this correctly? Even though technically I manage these people. So I think just letting ourselves be crappy at stuff so that we can get better at it was really important to just power through, rather than accepting that I'm just not good at this.
No, I think that's a good one, especially to those mungkin yang emang baru mulai juga or junior. I think really that focus, not only just, I think really being good at one thing first before expanding to others, but also having the courage intinya buat mulai aja gitu kan. I think at the end of the day, and it's a good place to do so in a startup where things are always a bit messy and it's actually okay to make mistakes. Obviously not big ones, but no, that's good. And I don't know, I don't know, Crystal, if you have gotten any questions. If not, I can share what.
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay, jadi yes please, kalau ada yang mau nanya, nanya langsung aja ya, karena mumpung ada Crystal di sini. Mungkin we don't bite, we're all good. Any questions, there's a good question. But ini mungkin ada satu lagi kali ya, Crystal. Oh, actually pas banget. But yeah, so this is a bit more about work in the chat. I don't know, so I can't help answer. But Crystal, what do you think?
I was going to try to find the template. Let me see if I can open a template real quickly so that people can see it. So basically, let's say that you are working on understanding retention. You would want to know who retains on Pizza Visa longer and why. And you have to start with some hypotheses. So let's say that you have, let's see, this hypothesis. Let's say that you have this hypothesis of people who get 10 donations, 19 donations are more likely to like make a second campaign than others, right? Like that's a hypothesis that you have to come up with. And so I would take every user ID, how many donations they got. So this would be like number of donations, one. And then I would look at users who got 0 donations, how many of them ended up creating a second campaign versus the users who did not. And this is basically a stats thing. You don't have to perfectly understand it, but what you do need to know is for those who got 0 donations, their likelihood to make a second campaign was like negative. So 1 means you're perfectly equal likelihood, equal probability of making a second campaign than anyone else. But because this is less than 1, that means you are like 90% less likely to make a second campaign if you got 0 donations. If you got 1 donation, you are 7 times more likely to make a second campaign. And this isn't as valuable by itself. What it is valuable with is when you compare number of donations in campaign number 1 with a second spreadsheet tab that is a behavior of whether or not they hit their goal, let's say. So did they hit their goal number? Yes or no? And let's say that if they did hit their goal number, it's actually 8 times more likely to make a second campaign. That means that reaching your goal is better for retention than receiving lots of donations. And so that helps you prioritize what strategy to use to create success in the business, because you know statistically that the likelihood of someone retaining is much higher when you optimize for them hitting their campaign goal instead of getting lots of donators. And the way that that would change my product strategy is maybe in the product, I'll try to help people set more realistic goals. I'll try to help them create estimates of like, hey, donations like this or campaigns like this are more likely to succeed when it's set at 3 juta instead of 5. So I'll try to help people, encourage them to set realistic goals so that they can reach that goal completion and then they feel good about it. And that might be more likely, might create more likelihood for them to make a second campaign. So it really depends on what's your outcome that you're trying to optimize for. Do you have a good hypothesis, or actually more than one hypothesis that you can identify either from user research or just your own intuition if you understand the business well enough? And then can you compare? And that's why that relationship between variables is super important. You need to do segmentation to find this thing, but you need to do relationship between variables to be able to pick, is it this or is it hitting the goal of the campaign? Does that make sense?
So at least for me, the insight that you'll get, I think makes a lot of sense. And definitely I feel, but I think detail-wise, yeah, I'll give it to, I think we also even have our data team as well here. Floppy's also here. So I think the technicals definitely, I hope they got something out of that as well.
Yes, everyone go rush your data team and ask them for stats 101.
Yes, yes. Okay. I got one question, but before that, Crystal, did anyone DM you directly for a question? If
Not
not,
yet.
okay. So we have one. I'll just verbatim say it. So any tips from you untuk department, I think related to the PM's altitude and solution altitude, yang serve several supervisor altitude in a group with different stage. So I guess comparing either groups of different supervisors, and those supervisors are also in different, I think, stages of their product or initiative. So yeah, any tips for that? I guess where you have multiple different types of supervisor. I think this role or question might be for someone who is more in a CEO office team, or someone that's,
Right. Like someone who has like multiple bosses
yes,
or
yeah.
multiple stakeholders. First, draw it out, because I think when we did this at Gojek, when we were setting the OKRs, that's what made us realize that it's impossible for this one person to make these like 6 people happy when they all had 6 different goals. So mapping it out, we could show people like, hey, I'm not just working with you. I have all of these other stakeholders who care about all of these different things. And then take that one level up. So like there's a boss supervisor altitude here, but they also have their own altitude map, right? They have their own boss on top as well. So being able to skip level up and be like, hey, I drew this out. Which one of these are actually more important to you? And having them make that final call is something that you can do in a startup, hopefully, because there's a lot less hierarchy or conformity in terms of like, I can't go to like my boss, or I can't go to my boss's boss. Like these should be openings for conversations that you can have that at least clarify it. And if not, then like, hey, you did your work of like trying to demonstrate that there is this conflict, and at least making it clear that you are working on the right things, or how you are creating this train of thought is helpful. That's kind of why I have both the qualitative and the quantitative, because qualitatively, maybe they make sense together, but quantitatively, there are different ways to measure each supervisor or each boss's metric goal. I don't really have like a here's how to solve this problem explanation for this, because like this is like a deeply seated, like this is politics. It's also like a lack of planning, or it's too much planning sometimes. But it's like part of the hard work of being a manager is being able to disentangle this and create at least transparency, if not clarity, right? Putting it transparently is a step towards making it clear the complexity of the problem. And it might be that you decide that like, yes, this is a very complex business and we do need all of these things, but how do we do it is up to you. So yeah, I, like with Gojek, we had like 21 business lines at some point. Like I can empathize that you have multiple stakeholders and multiple ways of measuring the goals. But at the same time, it's also like a problem that we signed up for, in terms of like, we want to be in a very complex intertwined business. And we did try to disentangle it by putting them clearly, like what are all of the drivers, which ones do we think are the most important ones? And we at least could like circle out in Q1, we're going to work on this part of the altitude map here, because we think that this is the best place to start. And you can at least then have that conflict or that conversation with the rest of the company if they disagree. But yeah, there's like no easy answer to that other than I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think the person who messaged me as well knew, it's not easy, but I think that's definitely, even though there's no right answer, I think what you're trying to emphasize, and emang pentingnya the inputs, right? I think what you're trying to make sure you do your best. I think drawing it out makes perfect sense. Just outlining everything. And also mungkin satu hal juga yang tadi udah di bring up, also nggak cuma dari supervisor top down, right? I think it's also an opportunity for team members or even yourself yang ngedrive ke atas juga gitu kan. I think you're the one drawing it out, you're the one also driving that process. So yeah, I think hopefully, I know I'm making anonymous. Hopefully that answers your question. And maybe I'll go next. There's another one. I think people are a bit shy. It's not in the group chat, but I'll keep it going. But yeah, I think we have plenty of time. So please feel free to ask more. I think one is, I think this is from a team manager. And I think one question they have is, let's say your team is underperforming, right? Either it's on the KPI side or just qualitatively, just their behaviors and whatnot. So, but basically underperforming. At least in your experience in Gojek and seeing others, how have you gone about it, right? Because I think especially nowadays we see a lot of layoff. It's just easy to, you know what, let's cut it, all good. But yeah, just curious whether you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think this is the symptom I usually see here is that they get increasingly desperate to try new things, like trying to get back on the path to success, when in reality, like you really need more structure when things are unclear. And that's why using the fog of war concept, I would illustrate it like you are like mountain climbing almost, like you leave like hooks as you go along the path. And when you go too deep on one path and it's not giving you returns, you need to go back to the basics and try another route instead of constantly trying to do the same thing. When this happens, generally I say like if you learn something new, that should update your past understanding of the business, not completely change it, right? Like when we think about Bayesian statistics or Bayesian methodology, it's the practice of taking new knowledge as an input to update your beliefs of the business, not shift entirely to something else without reason. So if the physics have changed or like you have this new input, going back and being structured about trying something new is more important. I'm trying to think of like a concrete example here. Like with GoPay, I think like when we tried to understand adoption, we would try like very random things like social.
Like the vendor social?
Yeah, like GoPay social or other like very left field ideas. And we ended up getting better success when we just tried stuff that already worked, but better. So like everyone knows they have a BCA account. What if we showed the user's virtual account number on GoPay as if it were a credit card, like building on familiarity of things that we knew worked and trying to figure out why that worked and then doing it better. Things like when drivers were our GoPay sellers, like they would tell you about GoPay, do you want to top up for the first time? We know that that works. Where else could that work? So we could have them sell like subscriptions or other types of services because that's what works for us. I think making sure that we take a structured approach with what we know works versus what we know doesn't work, and then trying to come to the middle is the best approach. But sometimes like maybe the market's just not that great, or maybe your old data is invalid because it was in a very different ecosystem. That should update our understanding of this situation rather than like start from a blank slate. Like I always try to put all of the data in a FigJam file so I can kind of like draw a map of my own of how the business is doing and what I know and what I've learned, so that I can create like a structured, valid map of where to go next. Yeah, I think that's a very like hand wavy story, but it's kind of a hand wavy process that you need to put into like structured data points, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think at least, yeah. I'm gonna do Indo and English here, so bear with me. But yeah, I think definitely that part about mungkin balik lagi ke basics ya. I think not trying to go too many anywhere to impress or to get back on track. Tapi ya tadi balik lagi basic, going back to make it more structured. Dan mungkin kalau tadi balik to the team, it's also both not from the supervisee, tapi juga dari atas ya. I think the supervisor giving that space and allowing that, in a way kayak nggak ditakut-takutin atau nggak di pressure kan. Karena ya when that happens, then I think that symptom of people trying to impress through other ways actually pop up. No, that one's good. The FigJam, I know it's about data, but the FigJam part where you put all the data was quite interesting. I think at some point in time I might do it just for my own business planning. But thank you. I you're okay with also other questions outside of the topic of this call, right? Because I've got
Yeah, totally. Let me answer one question that I just got from a DM that's related to this though. So they're asking if we set like a plan, we have an altitude map, it's very clear, but then something in the market changes. Should we set and forget it, or like how do we mitigate that problem of like not realizing or understanding the new data or new market conditions? So I think this is actually why the altitude map is important. So even in my product org at Kumu, we use the altitude map every 2 weeks. Like we will reference it and we'll update it with like, okay, we ran this experiment that was based on this solution scorecard. So we need to update it. So each of our, I wish I could show you guys like a sanitized altitude map, but I don't have one right now. Basically, let's pretend that this is the altitude map, and tipping, it says something like increase tippers by 5%. And we ran this experiment where we nudge the customer to remind them about the tipping feature, and it only increased it by like 1% instead of the 10% we needed. That new information goes into the altitude map, like this gigantic FigJam file of links to experiments and things that we tried. So there's this historical record of where we have gone and how that went. And let's say that a new market condition comes in, we actually have a section on the FigJam that's like industry. And it includes things like competitor metrics, competitor features, things that they're launching. And we use that as like the tooltip of the, like if you play League of Legends, there's like that tooltip box of like, you kind of uncovered this fog, but you can't see it directly anymore, like where people are moving, but you know that they were there before. And going back to this every quarter and being able to look at, okay, our map has evolved, but it isn't like we're gonna rewrite this from scratch, right? Just because a competitor did something doesn't mean the entire industry has been revolutionized. I think that's very rare. And so it's more about making sure that all of that data is in one place and looking at what that could impact. For example, in GoPay, like if a new regulation changes, that might really change our altitude map. And we have to look at what that connects to and what constraints existed before that we crossed out. Like there are also solutions that we decide not to do. Like if we decide that driver assistance wasn't important back then, we would just leave it here and say like, we're not working on it now, but that might change if XYZ variables change in the market. And that should be the case here too, that we adjust what we plan to work on and what market conditions it's connected to. And it needs to be a living document, essentially, that you update every 2 weeks or so.
Nice. Yeah, I think being open as well to reprioritizing or changing, right? Because at the end, I think like you mentioned, it should be a living document. Yeah, I think Kevin has a good question as well. You want to take it?
Yeah. So how much do I recommend learning data science? As a product manager, I would crawl before I run. So if you don't know how data flows in to your analytics tools, like what analytics tool do you guys use?
I think we use Tableau and Data Studio, but
okay. So Tableau and Data Studio are connected to something, right? To some data source. Where does that data come from? Like what are all of the different sources of data? If you can't answer that, you're probably not ready for data science yet. So I think first knowing that the way that users use the website, we use, I don't know, maybe we use Google Analytics, maybe we use CleverTap, maybe we use some sort of clickstream tool that knows when someone has clicked a button that gets sent to BigQuery, which then gets visualized in Tableau. Like I need to know that before I start using that data, because what if that data is like incorrect? What if it's not being tracked correctly? And then I'm running a bunch of data science on it that ends up creating falsehoods. The example I usually use here is like, let's say you are out at the mall and you see your girlfriend with another guy and you're like, she's definitely cheating on me. Like that might be wrong data because you realize actually that's her cousin and I'm just crazy. but you need to know this data point before you operate on it. Like the real insight is that you're a jealous person and you need to check yourself before you wreck yourself, versus my girlfriend's cheating on me and I need to break up with her. Knowing the data, underlying data, and how to use it will really inform the type of data science you're able to do and whether or not that data science will actually be valuable. So once I know how data works, then I might go into understanding how data science operates. So this would be things like how much data is necessary? How does data science work? Before I even start writing Python or running open source tooling, like I should see how it's applied successfully in other companies and in other open source libraries, like generative AI, how does that work? Before I start running it myself. So I do think it's important to know, but it's more important to understand the level of detail from the bottom before you move up. Because I find that it's less valuable if you go the other way around. Like you have this like high level understanding, very detailed understanding of data science, but you don't know how to get there. Like you've created a problem where you have this gap that you can't actually operationalize. And then you bother the data science team because you have all these ideas and ambitions, but you haven't taken the time to understand how hard the work is to get there. And I know a lot of data people are probably like, exactly, like, please start with the basics.
Oh, thank you. I think that example sounds a bit too real, but I think other than that, I think the insight is clear. Understand the basics, how it works, the foundational before doing all the more complicated things on top. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question, yeah, Kevin.
Yeah, in terms of resources, like I learned SQL through w3schools.org. In terms of learning like how data works, like I'm sure there are data onboarding docs in Kita Visa. If there's not, then something's wrong. Where you can like see like, how do you find tables? How do you know what columns mean? Like I would go through that first and then become best friends with the data person so that I can be helpful and tell them that like I'm trying to learn this so that you don't have to query simple things for me anymore. And working on internal data is always the best way of practicing this. Like all of the interns at Gojek and Kumu have to start out with internal data. Like there's a question that they want to answer. They have to try to find it for themselves. And like, that's the best resource to learn from because you can directly ask someone in your team, like, hey, am I doing this right?
That's a good practice because I think everyone, and maybe me included as well, we tend to be over dependent on the data team. But yeah, I think if I'm saying Herlin's here, right? I think you taught yourself SQL. So Herlin's in our CEO office. So yeah, I think yeah, that's a good one as well.
That's cool. Yes, everyone can learn SQL.
Great. No, I know there's 10. There's 10 minutes, but I'm not gonna keep you too long if there's no more questions. So maybe any last minute questions, can be about performance KPI. It can be about, I guess, data or anything related to product. Any questions you want to ask. Maybe I'll give a couple of minutes before. I think Rika turned on her camera, so I think there must be something I'm missing here. Oh, we have to take pictures afterwards. Yeah, we have to take pictures. So we'll make sure to get. Yeah. Any other questions, guys? Dari Rika, anyone ask any question? No, yeah.
No. Brian.
Oh yeah, Foppy, yes. So Foppy here leads our data team. So I think yes. Gimana, Foppy?
Sometimes I find it difficult to me with the imbalance between the number of the employee with the number of the data team. So sometimes I feel like data team was busy. We are busy making dashboard ad hoc requests. So we just provide what the other team needs. But sometimes on the other hand, we feel like we need to provide more analysis or insight or explore some things, but we we just don't have time to do it. So how to solve this?
This is it's a problem where like the debt becomes more and more expensive the longer you take to like generate those insights. I think the first thing is to like negotiate with the exec team and show them the altitude map as a plan. Like, here's what the company has been saying we need to do. We need to carve out like 20% of our time to look for insights that directly address this one part of the altitude map, because we feel like this is the area where everyone's going random and it's creating more data requests, but no one really knows what's happening. And then there is this other like 80% of the altitude map, wherein hopefully the business teams and product teams do actually have good intuition or good user research, that their data requests are less decision risk heavy. And I talk about this with the UXR teams as well, that you can't solve for everything. Like, not everything can be data driven because just you don't have enough people or time. And so there are parts of the business where you do have to be data driven, and the risk of not being data driven is much higher than in other parts of the business. And that's where I would negotiate that we need to be able to carve out this time. And it does mean that we're not going to work on XYZ thing. Like, we did this at Gojek early days. I think people wanted us to do like customer segmentation for like advertising, but like we didn't have an ad business yet. We didn't have anyone willing to do this work yet. So we said, we're actually not going to do this quarter because we need to work on this other thing. I think most execs, hopefully, are relatively reasonable when you show them the trade-offs of like, if I do this, I can't do this other really important thing. They will agree if they are shown like what the trade-off is. And that's why tools like the altitude map are important to be company-wide, so that there is that shared language and agreement of what we are prioritizing, whether that's OKRs or something else, and that we actually stick to that commitment to be able to say no. Because if you don't say no now, like everything else is going to be worse off. So we have to make those communicated and clear, and then people have to agree to it.
Okay, thank you so much, Crystal.
Yeah, but it's definitely hard. I empathize with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't see any other questions. But yeah, so I think maybe I'll wrap up then. But no, I think again, obviously, thank you so much, Crystal, for your time. I think everyone here, I hope everyone here got something, and also just learned a lot of new things, not just data, but obviously in terms of managing the team. Maybe before everyone starts leaving, let's open our camera. It's just the three of us. So I think we want to see more people's face. I think we'll take a quick group picture. And yes, also you do get the plug. So anyone, please, actually don't know. So I guess it's also something new to me. Check it out.
Yes.
Like,
please join our code.
follow. Great. Yeah, let's turn our cameras, do a group picture. And for all the Kita Bisa folks here, do not forget to fill in survey. I think HR gave me that oleh to share. But yeah, please open up your camera, guys, if you can. We'll take a quick group picture. There's only 10 here. So yeah, let's see. I'm sure you guys are all listening. So okay, we'll wait until more people open up their camera. But Rika, can you help screenshot? Gue takut ada yang miss.
Yeah.
Yes, I will post this on Instagram. So feel free to show up and tag yourself.
So 50% more pictures I think would come up, but I don't see more videos. So yeah, let me maybe a few more seconds.
Oke, cukup nih, pada malu-malu.
Yeah.
Oke, foto ya.
Siap.
1, 2, 3. Oke. Sudah.
Siap. But yeah, again, Crystal, thank you so much for coming by. It's virtual, so not, maybe when you're in Jakarta, we'd love to see you in the office. But thank you so much, and I hope both you and everyone here has a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye, guys.
Thanks, Crystal.
Thank you,
Have a good one.
Gigi.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you Brian and semuanya.
Yo.